Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to call the meeting to order, Planning and Zoning for August the 19th. And first order of business is to have our roll call. Ms. Secretary?
Ms. Anita Proto? Here. Mr. Jacob Carr?
Here.
Mr. Stavropoulos?
He's not here.
Mr. Gialusa?
Here.
Turn it on. Ms. St. Arnold? Here. Sorry. Mr. Delaco?
Here.
Mr. Vincent? Oh, that's unusual. Chairman Francis?
Present. Okay, thanks. We will now have our report and actually our quasi-judicial announcement and the swearing of speakers by our attorney, Mr. Yakavon.
Thank you. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the board acts in a quasi-judicial capacity. By law, it's the board's function at this hearing to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues arising from the application and the applicable code section. If the evidence demonstrates the applicant has met the criteria in the code, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the evidence demonstrates the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the code, then the board is required to find against the applicant. The parties to this hearing are the applicant and the city is represented by city staff. There may be persons, organizations, or groups that qualify as interveners. Persons or groups that qualify for intervener status can participate in the hearing as a party. A recognized intervener may examine witnesses, present evidence, and make arguments to the board. For a person to be granted intervener status, the person must demonstrate to the board that he or she will suffer an adverse effect as a result of the quasi-judicial decision which exceeds in degree that which may be suffered by the general community. Intervener status may also be granted to the representative of an organization or group of persons who have a substantial and compelling interest in the matter under consideration, if that organization or group can demonstrate that it is prepared to present competent and relevant evidence which would be of significant assistance to the board in making its quasi-judicial decision. In a few minutes, the chairperson will give persons, organizations, or groups desiring intervener status the opportunity to make their request. There's an established procedure that will be followed at this hearing. All witnesses must give their testimony under oath. All persons testifying must give their name and address for the record. All testimony and questioning at the hearing must address matters that are relevant and material to the issues under consideration. City staff will go first and present its testimony. The applicant and any recognized interveners will have an opportunity to cross-examine city staff. The applicant will then go and present its witnesses and evidence, and city staff and recognized interveners will have an opportunity to cross-examine the applicant's witnesses. Recognized interveners will then present their evidence and witnesses, and city staff and the applicant can cross-examine the intervener's witnesses. Absent unusual circumstances to be determined by the board, a party's opening statement and presentation should be limited to 10 minutes. At that point, we will proceed to the public comment portion of the meeting, where members of the public opposing the application will have an opportunity to present testimony. After all members of the public opposing the application have concluded, members of the public in support of the application will have the same opportunity. Each member of the public is limited to 4 minutes of testimony. A member of an organization or group granted intervener status who testifies as part of the organization or group's presentation forfeits the right to speak during the public comment portion of the meeting. During the public comment portion of the meeting, members of the public present may donate their time to a speaker to extend the speaker's time, but in doing so, the person donating the time forfeits his or her right to speak. Each donation shall extend the speaker's time an additional 2 minutes, but in no event shall the speaker's time be extended beyond 10 minutes of total speaking time. Following public comment, the applicant, city staff, and recognized interveners will have an opportunity to present rebuttal evidence and make a closing argument or summary. The applicant goes first, followed by city staff, and then by any interveners. Absent unusual circumstances to be determined by the board, A party's closing summary and rebuttal evidence should be limited to 10 minutes. Following this, the board will consider the matter. At this point, I would ask all persons who intend to testify on this matter to raise your right hand, and that means go to the microphone and speak, to raise your right hand and take the following oath. I think you're going to testify. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I have affirmations all around. I assume the chairman will ask whether there are any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications.
Do we have any ex parte? Ms. Curtis?
I wonder if I have a conflict of interest. I think my
Can you
property
speak into the mic, please?
You'll need another one here. I own property on Hope Street, which is quite a distance from this area. But because I own property on Hope Street, Renee and Mr. Jacobone, do I have a conflict of interest?
How far?
There is Halas Bakery. It's right behind Halas Bakery that also serves liquor.
No.
I do not.
No, you wouldn't have any conflicts on the
sure.
legislative portion, only the quasi-judicial matter.
Okay. I just wanted that cleared up to be on the tape and in the minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Yakima, how far away is there a distance requirement?
No. I think I sent you a memo on that a while ago. There's really no bright line test for when being in an area or close to a particular applicant can create a conflict of interest. It's almost, you can read the cases and it's hard to figure out. It's almost sort of a dilution theory. If you're far enough away and the effect is diluted enough, then you don't have a conflict of interest. If you're closer, you may have a conflict of interest, and it's very difficult to make that determination. But in this case, according to Renee, this property is located way at the end of the district, so I would think that there would be no conflict of interest.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mr. Delagas.
Mr. Jacobone, just for general information here in regards to this, I would think in the future for stuff like this, unless the applicant has a business or an entity that's going to be in some way a conflict or of what that other person's property or lease or business does on that, I would think that would be a bigger factor, wouldn't it?
Well, that's okay. I think that's part of the matrix that goes into consideration of whether there's a conflict of interest. If what the applicant has requested can have no possible effect on surrounding property values, then it's very difficult to show a conflict of interest. But if the applicant is requesting something that could have an effect on adjoining property values or traffic flow or in some way affect the other property, then you may. As I say, it's probably one of the most difficult determinations to make, only because the cases aren't that clear and the ethics opinions aren't that clear.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you going to be the agent? Okay. If you'll come up to the microphone, up to the lectern, and give us your name and address, please. And that mic is adjustable. You can take it off if you want. And,
okay. Anthony Sarukas, 2904 Wendover Terrace, Palm Harbor, Florida, 34685.
Pull your mic up a little bit so you can speak right to it.
Staff report.
yes.
Is that working better?
Yeah.
All right.
I apologize. I jumped the gun. I got you up too early.
Should I sit back down?
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is application 13-53 for Signature Hospitality Group. The property address is actually three business addresses, 2533 and 35 Dodecanese Boulevard. These properties were previously had businesses known as Cafe Greco and the Yamas Martini Bar. The applicant desires to basically combine both of those spaces into, one combined restaurant space and is seeking a, 4 COP license for the beer, wine, and liquor for on-premise consumption. Actually, the Yamash Martini space itself already has a 4 COP license because he wants to move into the adjoining space, which was never previously approved, and he's back here really to add that part of the space on. So we're looking at all 3 of those business addresses that are all concurrently adjacent to each other. Under the standards for review, conformance with the requirements of the Land Development Code, there really are no issues with distance separation between churches and schools. They're well outside the 500 feet between a church or school of general education. There are several criteria listed as additional review in the application. Really, the staff does not find that any of those that we anticipate any issues. As I said, this has been functioning pretty much as both a restaurant and a bar area previously now for several years without incident. We don't find any adverse effects on the city to be able to provide services or environmental or historical resources, and we do find that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Staff recommendation is to approve the conditional use for 25, 33, and 35 Dodecanese Boulevard for a 4 COP on-premise consumption of beer, wine, and liquor. The only condition that we are recommending is any outdoor seating that would be on the public right-of-way, a public sidewalk, would require a separate sidewalk cafe permit agreement. And with that, I'll close and answer any comments as appropriate during the public hearing process.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Curtis. Do you have any questions for staff?
No, I just congratulating the young man for taking such
Microphone.
Okay.
congratulating the applicant for taking such a tremendous step in opening such a business at of this type in this day and time right now, and I believe that it's going to be an added complement to that end of the dock. And it's surrounded by restaurants and drinking establishments, so it's not any different than what's there.
Good. Mr. Arrow.
No, nothing. Thank you.
Mr. Carr.
No questions.
Mr. Delacus.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent, in the report, and also you just mentioned sidewalk cafe agreement would be required. If I remember, do they not have seating outside? Do they not have an outdoor application?
There was the previous Cafe Greco had a sidewalk cafe permit. They're gone now.
Okay, so it's
we'll
not...
have to revisit it, for the new owner.
So the Cafe Greco people are separate from these
Correct.
people.
Yes.
So the Cafe Greco had it, they're gone.
Right.
These are new, want to
Right.
expand, have to add. Got it, thank you.
Mr. Julius.
No questions.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Okay, well, now we'll hear from the applicant. You have 10 minutes. Okay.
I don't really have a lot to say. I put a lot of legwork into getting the appropriate documentation provided to Renee in as timely a fashion I possibly could. I found out today that I happened to walk in there and ask questions about the process. Was the last day to submit all documentation, and I devoted my entire day to getting a signed, sealed a survey and all of the other requirements that apparently would typically take a considerable amount of time to collect. And I was there by 5 in the afternoon, and here we are. So hopefully I'm able to combine those two spaces. They're already a bar and a restaurant, and I hope that it's something that really does great in Tarpon. I mean, I hope so. I think it will. I'm pretty sure it will. So.
Okay, just stay right there, and we'll see if there are any questions from the board members. Mr. Julius.
No questions.
Are you going to have any entertainment there? Or?
The first step is getting the doors back open.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of bids out for sprinkler systems. That's a new requirement per the fire code now. But it's upwards of $60,000, so I'm trying to find a better way to get it accomplished. But there will be live music, yes, once I get all of those processes.
Okay, so down the road.
Right.
Okay.
For anybody that's not aware, under the new building code, if you have seating of 150 seats or greater, you have to have the place sprinkled, and this kind of came out of the whole Rhode Island club fire thing that took place. So, but it is a new requirement.
Okay. Mr. DeLankis?
No, that's good, thank you.
Mr. Carr?
Have you thought about eliminating 17 seats to just axe that then? Because you have a total of 167 seats.
When I continue to move forward with the application with regard to the DBPR's requirements for establishing a baseline for seating, I'd like it to be true and say this is the number of seats I can fit. And that way, if I end up with more seats, I never want to have the potential of losing the investment for purchasing the 4COP package license versus the extra, 20 or 30 minutes of documentation it took to put that together to appropriately disclose the number of seats that it can seat.
Okay. Any other questions?
Ms. Arnold?
No questions.
Mrs. Curtis?
No.
I don't have any questions. Okay. Have a seat.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move for approval of application 1353 for items on location 25 to 35.
One second. Hang on, we gotta have them have a seat, and then we've got a couple more things to do.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Put your name on there.
Okay.
So it's still raining.
Yes.
Oh, if there's anyone here in the audience.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak against this application? Is there anyone who wishes to speak for it?
Now you can make your motion.
Okay. Hearing, seeing none, close the public portion, and
My motion stands.
okay, would you like to repeat it again, please?
That we approve application 1353, Signature Hospitality Group, for location 25, 33, and 35, Southern East Boulevard.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Roll call, Ms. Secretary.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes. Guys are done.
Welcome.
Best of luck.
Welcome.
Best of luck to you. You're welcome.
If it's raining too hard, come back and listen. Dancing the street.
Okay, now I think the Director of Planning and Zoning will take over.
Let me say what a pleasure it is to be here. I haven't been here in a long time. The next we have three ordinances that are proposed amendments. The first is ordinance 2013-18, which is amending Appendix B of the Code of Ordinances, which is commonly known as the SMART Code. The second one is amending the Special Area Plan, which is the kind of the future land use component that is associated with the SMART Code. And those two ordinances kind of work hand in hand. And then the third ordinance, 2013-19, is an amendment regarding how we process waivers to sidewalks in the city of Tarpon Springs, the requirements to build sidewalks at the time of construction. I'll walk through these. Most of the board has seen these before. They came before the Planning and Zoning Board for a review a few months ago. I'm not sure if there may have been some changes on the board since then, so I'll go ahead and walk through these so that hopefully it'll be somewhat cohesive. There's a lot of small changes that kind of work together to achieve where we're going. The SMART Code itself was adopted in March of 2011, and after 3 years of working with the code, we are, or almost 3 years, we've noticed some tweaks that need to be made. Some are minor, some are, as kind of seeing where development trends are going, needing to address some changes in the code to kind of further facilitate certain types of development. The first ordinance, the 2013-18, focusing on the SMART Code changes, under Chapter 1 in the general instructions, we're removing, this is a cross-reference section to anything that's not directly addressed in the SMART code. We've cross-referenced certain sections of the land development code for certain, engineering standards and things like that. So we're proposing to remove the reference to the stormwater requirements of the land development code and simply rely on the requirements for SWIFT-MUD, Southwest Florida Water Management District. And what that does is it gives us a little more flexibility with properties and redevelopment properties and how we address stormwater. In the special area plan, we have a lot of properties that are built and being rebuilt and things like that. So it just gives us a little flexibility. It doesn't eliminate stormwater requirements at all. It allows us to use only the SWIFT-MUD requirement. The land development code is a little more strict in that when you're looking at the redevelopment of a property, it can require you to bring the entire property into compliance with the land development code, which is more onerous than the SWIFT-MUD requirements right now. So we're trying to get a little flexibility there. The second, under Table 4E, building function, limited retail, we're making some changes to that. Those correspond to changes in the T4C district. So as I walk through these, hopefully these will kind of come together, but I'm somewhat disjointed to present it this way. But I'm presenting them in the ordinance in the way that they appear in the ordinance. Under the parking calculations, Table 4E, we're adding the ability to consider a parking exemption in the T5B district. That is basically the Tarpon Avenue district. Again, historically, those properties mostly are built lot line to lot line and don't provide parking on site, and that we're recommending that to help facilitate the redevelopment of some vacant lots on Tarpon Avenue. It's contingent upon there being available public parking within a 5-minute walk. Under Table 4F, specific function and use, and the Table 4F is kind of the matrix of all the permitted and conditional uses. So the changes that we're recommending there, that single-family detached is added as a conditional use in the T4A district. This was something that we kind of came across that was probably an oversight when the code was originally implemented. There are some existing single-family homes in these areas that basically have been non-conformed completely, so this is really to address that issue, to at least allow, as a conditional use, single-family homes in those areas where they currently are not allowed to be built. Seasonal and short-term rental is amended to a permitted use in the T4C district. The T4C district is really the big areas between what would be Orange and Dodecanese, that big yellow block in the middle. We're trying to promote an area where we can get additional, basically tourists, places where tourists can stay. We don't have a lot of hotels, motels, and B&Bs. So to be able to have, if you have a home there and have it be like a 2-week rental is basically what that would allow. There are 2 other areas that are T4C that may be or maybe even 3, 2 particularly, that might be of concern, that are closer to the Spring Bayou area. So if that's of a concern and we want to address that, we can. Next is open market buildings are removed as a permitted and conditional use in all districts. That was really addressing, I think everybody knows what that was addressing. Retail buildings, retail building is amended as a permitted use in the T4C district. Right now it's set as a conditional use in that table. However, so that people understand that really, the only place that's really going to be in effect will be this area of basically between Orange and Dodecanese, this large T4C area. Because of the language in a different table, the areas over around Spring Bayou that are in the Spring Bayou Character District, retail, it's not permitted there anyway. So that amendment doesn't apply to those two little pieces of T4C. Art studio was amended to a permitted use in the T4C. Restaurants are added as a conditional use in the T4C. Again, those same restrictions are going to apply to those T4C properties in the Spring Bayou Character District. It won't apply to those because they're limited elsewhere as not being allowed. Those are all grouped under retail uses.
Correct that. All T4Cs around Spring Bayou will not be allowed to have those.
That will not be allowed to have the retail or restaurant functions, correct. Correct. Let's see, kiosks are removed as a permitted or conditional use in all districts. And then H, outdoor display of merchandise, that's being added into the list and specifically added in the T5C in the SDB district, that's Dodecanese, and the Marine Tourist district. That's really to get up to make it consistent with the fact that there's been an outdoor display of merchandise in that area now. So we wanted to capture that in this code. So that puts it into place, puts it in those two districts as the only place that it's allowed, and then there's a definition that's provided for outdoor display of merchandise where and how it can happen.
But those that are there now, will they be grandfathered in?
Essentially, yes, they will. I mean, this will basically make it consistent with how the code was previously written. And then table 5A, which is that's kind of the big matrix code. This thing here. The T5B district is amended to remove the maximum density by transfer. Basically, that's the Tarpon Avenue district, the T5B. And again, what we're trying to achieve there, the base residential density of 15 units per acre stays in place, but there's a provision that allows density by transfer. So if you have unused density somewhere else, you can transfer it onto a property as long as it's not in the coastal hazard area. When this code was drafted, we put some caps on that because, frankly, when you start talking about higher densities, sometimes there's an uneasy feeling about density. So we put caps in place at that point in time. We do have a potential project on Tarpon Avenue that really, in order for it to fully develop, we need to remove that density cap. They still will be, constrained by the floor area ratio that can be developed as well as the height. So it's not like they can put a 10-story building. They still have to work in the same building envelope, but they'll get some additional density to be able to maybe get a few more units on the property and make the project viable. In the T4C district, again, we're amending to allow limited retail as opposed to the restricted that it's now. And then the building form and height notations, that was more of a Scrivener's error. Are corrected. Number 6. These are the individual cut sheets for each district. It's another summary sheet. So these changes are just making these consistent with other changes that we've made. The T4C residential high, the retail function, again, amended from restricted to limited. In the Marine Industrial Commercial District, that is amended to allow 3 stories by conditional use, and that really is recognizing that came about as the Cox Seafood variance for Mr. Cox's project. He received a variance to go to 3 stories, so we're making this consistent. We want it to be cut by a conditional use, but we want the ability if he needs to address that in the future, as well as any other properties in that same district. And then Chapter 6, as I stated, we're amending the definition of outdoor display, or actually creating a definition of outdoor display. And if you're curious, I'll just read that into the record, what we have recommended. The outdoor display of retail merchandise limited to the area in front of and adjacent to the storefront and occupying a space no deeper than 30 inches, measured from the front of the primary structure, regardless of whether the outdoor display is on the public or private property. Merchandise shall not be hung from or affixed to any part of the building. So that's the proposed definition for outdoor display of merchandise. And that's fairly consistent with the Code of Ordinance definition that we have today. It's a little more hemmed in, but it's fairly consistent with that. Moving on to the next ordinance. Yes.
If I may, can we discuss some of these items first before we get to the Board of Adjustment? Well, that's why I was going to ask.
Mr. Chairman, I need to know if I have a conflict on the sponge stock piece. Again, with this, what she's describing, I own a piece of property in that area.
These are all legislative.
I don't care. I don't want any conflict. Mr. Delakas, I want it on this tape, and I want it in the meetings because people will come after you, as you well know, with actions.
That's fine. And you'll find that as we discuss all the legislative
stuff. The attorney say yes or no.
No, you don't have a conflict of interest when in a legislative
I want
matter.
it on the tape, please, in the minutes. Thank you.
You don't have a conflict under Florida statutes now. But,
okay.
Okay.
The reasons for it.
All right. Mr. Delakas,
Okay, couple of things. First, while we're on this page about the maximum density transfer, and it's talking about on the fact sheet was 22 dwelling units per acre. And without going into specifics about quote unquote project projecting, are we talking about when you say dwelling units like apartments, efficiencies, those type of things, or are you talking about quote-unquote dwelling units like in a hotel or...
That would be transient accommodation or lodging. So dwelling units is a dwelling unit. It has to have a kitchen, a bathroom, what would normally be, an apartment, a condominium, that, exactly.
Okay. All right. So within this district, even though we can release the cap on how many dwelling units, what you're telling us, though, is between FARs, building height, the amount of space available on a property, those things will be factors in how many units can be placed on a property.
Absolutely. Those do not go away.
Now, do we have, and I'm not familiar, but maybe you might be, do we have in the code a minimum square footage or a requirement as a certain minimum size for what, quote-unquote, a dwelling unit would be? So if it has to have a bathroom, has to have a kitchen, has to have a bedroom, is there some sort of minimum that, because I know when we did the affordable housing thing for like the live-ins, it was like 600 feet.
Yeah.
Remember the 600?
Land development code is 600 square feet basically for an apartment building. I will say this, under the SMART code, the minimum square footage that they cite for an accessory dwelling unit is, I believe, 500 square feet.
Well, because I know when we did the accessory for residential, it was 600, I thought.
Right, in the land development code it was.
Okay.
So we don't have a, other than the reference to the how we define an accessory dwelling unit, which is one that has to be understanding utilities as the primary dwelling. We don't have in the SMART code. There's not a minimum square footage. So it would fall to the Florida building code as to what constitutes a dwelling unit.
Okay,
and I don't know what that is off the top of my head.
All right, but it's not so they would be squeezing in 6x3 bedrooms and 2x2 bathrooms.
There's definitely minimum habitable space and things of that nature for a dwelling unit. And I would say that just, it definitely couldn't be less than 500 square feet because that's the smallest you can go to as an accessory dwelling unit in our code. So I think that would definitely be a standard there.
So even though our code may not say that's the minimum, that would be what we would rely on within code as our guideline.
Definitely.
Okay. Unless anybody else wants to talk about that part, the only other thing I was curious about is, the stormwater stuff.
Right.
Would every property be subject to SWIFT-MUD? If it's residential, they wouldn't be subject to SWIFT-MUD.
Generally, no.
Basically, we're talking about commercial properties.
Correct.
And our code would normally say they would have to handle the stormwater in some regard.
Yes. They still have to handle stormwater under SWIFT-MUD. You still have minimum, on-site retention requirements, percolation requirements, depending on where you are. Where the rub is with this, with the way our current code reads, and let me find that section and I'll discuss it a little bit. So basically, our code says that if you hit a certain threshold of development, if it's more than, and this is really more about redevelopment. So if you have a site that, frankly, right now is built lot line to lot line and is, has 100% impervious surface, the way our code reads, if you redevelop the property and you disturb more than 1/3 of the property, you have to bring the entire property up to code and up to the land development code standard for stormwater regulations. And we're just finding that it can be a deterrent to redevelopment of, if you can't get a SWIFT-MUD exemption letter. That's why we want to, if we implement what we're talking about, it allows you to go to SWIFT-MUD and you're more likely to be able to get exemption letters for certain things under a redevelopment scenario, that's really what this is really going to affect. If it's new development and it's raw land, you're still going to have to deal with, but it's really more the properties that are, it gives us some latitude to look at just using swift flood requirements as opposed to, digging a pond on Tarpon Avenue, frankly. I mean, that's just not what we want. And in these urban areas, we need to find better ways to deal with stormwater than putting these, frankly, crappy little ponds all over the place that just collect garbage. So we're trying to find creative ways to deal with that and still meet the swift flood requirements.
Now, since this is, it's going to be throughout the Smart Code Special Area Plan, is any of this being tied to what Public Works is doing with their master stormwater plan in a sense such that for these areas that we're trying to, in a sense, reduce the private side of stormwater accumulation, that we're maybe also looking at it on a public side? Because if you're talking about, one, not every building that redevelops is starting to have a pond, then we need to have some kind of a stormwater plan that would handle that redevelopment.
When projects come in, we work as closely as we can with the Public Works side and Public Services side and stormwater folks to try to find ways that are win-win. Sometimes, if we have room in ponds and, we are expanding ponds, the Stormwater Action Plan they're addressing deficiencies, but they're also, we've expressed to them anywhere that we can get additional capacity to facilitate some of these other developments, that's what we would like to do. Is it as integrated as I would like right now? No, frankly it's not. But that's something that we would, and it's something that we wouldn't mind looking at maybe through the CRA. I mean, I would be really interested in, some sort of a pay-and-go type of thing so that we could get funds to, work with our existing stormwater funds to be able to address these area-wide stormwater requirements. But that's a little more advanced than where we are right now. So right now we work directly with the applicants when they come in to find the best way to solve their their stormwater needs, and if we try to accommodate them as much as we can through our existing systems.
You just gave me a thought. You just said, you want to relieve their stormwater needs, and yet we'll work with the city. Later, we're going to be doing the sidewalk waiver, and part of that is a fee to reimburse the city for future sidewalks. Mm-hmm. Well, basically, this is saying, you don't have to do stormwater with, and if it sounds like you go to
that.
No, it says you don't have to do with us. You have to do with Swift Mud. And there again, I'm not fully aware of the process, but
right.
You did mention something to me that makes me think Swift Mud's going to say, your property is constrained. You get an exemption letter, which in some way, I'm not sure what it would do, but somewhat alleviate, let's say, the expense or what would need to be done otherwise. So I guess what I'm curious is, and this would be on a higher legislative level at some point, whether in exchange for reducing the stormwater requirements, that there's some assistance in the overall stormwater master plan. And it's just a suggestion that
I understand where you're going. We've talked about those types of things. We're not there yet. I think it's something that we definitely want to explore in the future, as we continue to try to develop the CRAs. I think there's something, those types of things definitely need to be considered.
Okay.
Yep.
Those were pretty much the thoughts that I had on that. Otherwise, I think most of the amendments are, like you say, corrective, and I don't see any detriment to, any economic or development growth from those aspects. Thank you, Renee.
You're welcome.
Mr. Curtis?
It's now the time, Renee, for us to discuss what we were discussing
Sure.
earlier. Well, I just want to say I do have a problem with 1.2.1. It says provisions of this code are activated by shall when required, should when recommended, and may when optional. Are we going to have conflict with those words in under attachment A? Those shall, should, and may.
Those are there now.
Those can go either way, a long way,
Well,
and cause controversy instead of having something concrete.
No, that's not a changes being proposed.
I
That's
know,
the way the
but I
code's
was
written,
asking
so.
you, do you,
No, that's
All right.
a normal.
that's normal? I just had a problem. Okay, I want to talk about the Crescent area of the city. When I said Crescent, Renee says, what's that? I said, that's the
I knew what you
Bayou
said.
area. That is our historic crescent of the city of Tarpon Springs. That's what it's been referred to for hundreds of years, the Crescent area. And looking through this, and on page 52, I started looking at where the T4C is. And it's also on the trail. Well, the trail and that area on Banana Street are not the same. When you get on Banana Street and around the Crescent, that's all historical there. So I asked Renee, I said, does that mean, what can you put in there with these, you want restaurants and places, like it's a drinking establishment or rental, which you can have on the trail. But I'd like to know, when you look at this, you'll see 3 big historic homes there in the yellow under the T4C. And further down Banana Street. And I'm sitting here thinking as we are having our meeting, and you go south on Banana Street, there really isn't a facility to accommodate what you could put in there under this. These are residential homes. This is all residential. Can we take the T4C out of those yellow boxes there?
Are you talking about the
homes?
Because the retail doesn't apply there. Those changes are for retail and restaurants. Those are exempted out of those particular areas.
But can we change that to something better than T4C, where those homes are, so they will not even become a bed and breakfast, because those are very historic homes.
That was part of, when this went through the focus group, and the fact that the bed and breakfast and everything, that's been in the code from day one. And, that was, that went through a lot of vetting. If you're not comfortable with the changes being proposed tonight is specifically to allow seasonal or short-term rentals that would apply to those 2 areas as well as the rest of the T4C. If the board's not comfortable with that, I'm more than happy to pull that out right now and we can deal with that at a later date. Or we can similarly put a restriction in that basically says in the Spring Bayou District, it will not apply. I can do that, and I'm glad Mrs. Tarpon is here to speak to whether or not she thinks it's a good idea. So, since she's a directly affected property owner, so that if you want to take that off the table, and if the board thinks that that's a good idea, I'm not wedded to this. I'm more concerned about getting it in the area that's between the downtown and the sponge docks, because from that area, you can walk to the downtown, you can walk to the docks. It's a good place to have some additional types of tourist accommodations, not necessarily a hotel or a motel, but like I said, if you own a single-family home and you want to have, a 2-week or a seasonal rental or something like that, you would be able to do that in that area.
Well, we have a bed and breakfast there that really complements the community. But we have 2 motels there that are definitely not complimentary to the community. It is our historic area. I would like to see it full. I may be the only one on the board that feels that way. I think part of our responsibility is to preserve and keep our historic preservation areas here. That is our biggest one. That's what we're noticed for. And I'm very concerned what can come out of that T4C in the future. And I would like to take it out and keep it just historic and leave it out of there. But I don't know how the rest of the board feels. I think we're treading on something very serious when we're going to that. I mean, these homes are old. They've been on historic preservation. A lot of them in that area are in historic preservation. And I do not want to see any of that opened up to anything else.
Well,
and there were no comments from looking through here while you were talking. I mean, I can name the homes that are on the historic preservation, and I would like to personally have them. I know I would like to have them moved out. Those those, two sections there. I don't know how
Well,
the rest of the board
bed and
feels about
breakfast
it.
that's already there and permitted.
Right.
You know, B&Bs is already permitted in those
Well,
areas.
we need to restructure that.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree, because that went through a year and a half of focus group meetings, planning and zoning board meetings, board of commissioners meetings. Everybody's been notified. I mean, people were very much in the loop, when those things were put in place. Now, if you...
I would like to know how many were for it and how many were against it.
Should have been to me.
Because I'm going to tell you
Nobody
why we would
spoken
not
against.
allow...
No one was here speaking against
We
it.
would not allow Mr. Vincent to open his law office there, who lives on the Crescent. We didn't allow Don Scholl to open his law office on the
Mr.
Crescent.
Vincent's property's not in here.
It's around there because of
But it's
all
not
the
in
rest
this
of the
district,
area. I'm
ma'am.
trying to explain to you, please. You weren't here when all this went through.
But we're dealing
We're
with the
going to be
president
here a long time
not the past.
when everybody else is retired, and I think that we need to preserve and take those two out. I personally would like to see them taken out, as we were talking earlier. I just, sitting here, I can see, I see people who live there. I don't know how they feel about it, but I know how I think about it because of historic preservation. And you know I'm hard on that. Once we lose and we open up things, we're in trouble.
Opening up a bed and breakfast, or it doesn't allow you to tear down an historic structure.
I know it doesn't, but what you see there, we need to be very cautious on that. When you go to St. Augustine, you even go to Key West, you go to these other historic preservation communities, they preserve very,
You know
very
how
hard.
many homes in Key West are seasonal tourist rentals? Probably 90%
The newer
of
ones,
them.
the newer ones, Renee, not the old ones.
Yes,
the
they
newer
are.
ones. Because I've been down there for
Okay,
historic
we've
preservation.
said our piece. It's up to the board as to whether or not you want to keep that particular seasonal short-term rental amendment in or out.
Who asked you to put it in there?
This is a recommendation of staff, because we continually get requests from people that are looking for places to be able to stay. Tourists come here and they can't find a place downtown or close to downtown. We have 2 B&Bs, that's it. And you've got the hotels, but you've seen the condition that those are
That's
in.
it, and that's not
So
the
we're
in that
there.
area.
Well, and we're hoping that we'll get those redeveloped at some point. So, we see, the real focus of this was to limit it to, what we're really wanting to try to focus it is this area that's between downtown and the sponge docks, because you can comfortably walk from that location to either one of those locations. If the board is not comfortable with the seasonal short-term rental in the area around, I can simply write it in and take it out. I can, that's not a problem. I want to keep it in, I'm more focused on keeping it in this area than I am around the
Quite a few years
Crescent.
ago, we took it out of other rentals for seasonal or European, rental. I remember that was a big,
It was a big hullabaloo.
huddle, and we took it out. I truly believe that planning and zoning has a responsibility, yes, to bring business and good business into Tarpon and bring money into Tarpon, but I also think we have a responsibility to be conservative and take care of our historic and our areas, what we have here. And for this reason, I would like to see that, and I, for one, would vote to take those out. You have other areas in town where you can have your bed and breakfast.
I don't hear no motion in second, so we're trying to move that out.
We have it. We have what we have. Yeah, we have.
So, Mr. Jackson, what do we do with this now?
If there's not a consensus of the board to take them out, I think we just move on. So it's up to the board at this point as to
What is
whether
the
or not.
consensus of the board? To preserve and take care of what we have in our historic...
Well, I'll tell you what, you make a motion for what you want and see if you get a second, and then if you get a second, we'll vote
I
on it.
understand how it works, Mr.
Well, just ask how we do it.
Blackus. I'm asking Mr. Yakavone, who's our
Mr.
leader.
Yakavon doesn't run the meeting, he's advisory
Okay.
here.
Well, you don't either.
Okay,
Address the chairman then.
this is,
I did.
we're gonna take each,
This is the first ordinance,
Each,
so yeah, if you want to go ahead and discuss it, I guess I would, is there any other concerns of the board regarding the changes to the smart code?
it's open. Anybody wanna say anything?
I'm good.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that in the T4C district in the Spring Bayou, there's a table that won't allow restaurants and other retail buildings? What?
That's under the table 4E, under the building function table. You read under restricted retail, and then the changes that we're also putting in under limited retail that specifically says that for a property that's in the T4C that's also within the Sponge Dock Character District or the Spring Bayou Character District, that basically you're not allowed to have those functions. So it accepts it out. Because those were more residential in nature, so we didn't want to overburden them.
So what ones are falling in that area?
The only ones then that are exempt or would not get the additional retail, would be for the retail functions that we were adding in, are the T4C areas that you see that are right across from Spring Bayou and just to the south around Banana Street. So the retail stuff that the retail as a permitted and the restaurant as a conditional, those would not apply there because those are retail functions as a whole, and so they would not. That table exempts those out, so that does not apply.
The art studio and the seasonal short-term rental still.
An art studio still falls under. Let me see if that falls under that conglomerate of retail. No, that's still considered a retail function, so even that would not be allowed.
Okay.
Okay, so are we ready to,
We may want to have public comment on these individually since...
yes.
Okay.
Okay, is there any, now we're on the first
We're just on the first one, yeah.
first ordinance, okay.
One and two.
Well, I think we have to, Mr. Yagabon, we have to vote on each one of these separately. Is that correct?
Yes.
You can do it that way, or if there's general agreement on most of them, and,
You mean the whole package?
well, the ordinances, yeah, you can vote on the ordinances separately.
Okay.
Let me ask procedurally, do you want me to go ahead and discuss the next two ordinances and get
Well, let's get the first one done.
Okay.
One way or the other. Can we open it? Any other questions for staff at this time? Anything you want to raise? Okay. Can we open it up to the public? Okay. Mr. Tarpon, just give us name and address.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Cindy Tarapani, 22 North Spring Boulevard. I'm representing myself and my husband tonight. We only have one concern, which has to do with the retail uses in the T4C. As Renee pointed out, there's several places where there is T4C. Our home at 22 North Spring is in the small T4C, on the west side, on the Spring Bayou side. My only suggestion, we agree that retail, restaurants, any of those artist studios, any of the retail uses should not be in Spring Bayou. We agree with that, and we agree with the language in Table 4E. With one minor suggestion, you use the word in Table 4E, the sentence says retail use is not permitted on lots within T4Z that is within Spring Bayou. We agree with that, but retail use is one use, and there's about 10 different things in the general category of retail. There's also artist studio, restaurant, kiosk, alcoholic beverage. So I guess what I'm suggesting is if you could just say retail uses are not permitted, that would be really clear that none of the things that are considered the category of retail are allowed there, then that's the only thing we're concerned about.
put that in both the restricted and the limited? Thank you. That's a very good suggestion.
And that we didn't have any other objections. The rest of it, that's the only area of concern we had.
So you're okay with the seasonal short-term rental aspect? Is that bothersome to you with the property owner there?
No, I mean, as I understand, it's a single-family house that someone wants to rent out for a shorter period of time, and if that's what somebody wants to do, I mean, I think if it becomes a problem, it tends to become a problem if there's multiple units in a building, but that's just my experience. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Please identify yourself and give us your address.
Todd Eckhouse, 103 South Spring Boulevard. I just learned about this today, Renee, so I don't really know much, but I'm asking specifically the property that is south of Hoffman's property, Louise, what did I forget her name?
Sykes.
Sykes, yeah. that falls into this category, is that right? And so, and what can go there then?
The only thing, the amendments that are applying tonight that would be changes would be, they would be allowed to do like a seasonal or tourist home there. None of the retail stuff would apply, no restaurants, artists, shops, or anything like that. Just the seasonal short-term rental would be the only addition there.
Okay. And, as far as B&Bs go, I'd like to keep that possibility available, you know. I think it kind of adds aesthetically to an area, you know. And I know that Shoal has had several people look at his house along those lines. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. John, do you have anything you want to say? Okay. Time for. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess we just want to go ahead and move on, and we'll.
Well, we have to. We need a motion for.
Go ahead and adopt each one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Separately, each one separately. Okay. We're open for a motion on ordinance 2013-18. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve ordinance 2013-18.
Just for the record, I will, as a matter of fact, I will include the recommendations made by Ms. Tarpon to just change that to uses. That's a good recommendation.
Sure. And with the amendment Vincent mentioned.
Second.
Is there a second? Mr. Parson. Okay, we're open for discussion. Okay, no discussion. Call for the question. Ms. Secretary?
No.
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay.
And we already discussed the special area plan, the ordinance too, with that. So it's not like we had other discussion to come on the second ordinance, correct, Ms. Cynthia?
Yeah, the second ordinance is removing the density cap. That corresponds to that change in the first ordinance. So the second ordinance is just removing the 22 per unit density cap in the downtown character district only.
Okay. Motion to approve ordinance 2013-20.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, we're up to number 3, ordinance 2013-19.
Thank you. Okay, ordinance 2013-19 is amending the Tarpon Springs Land Development Code, specifically the section of the code 132 that deals with the necessary requirements to build sidewalks. This is kind of coming by way of the Board of Adjustments and recommendations from them to provide a mechanism to allow the city to be able to accept a payment in lieu of under certain circumstances. I think this came in its original form to the Planning and Zoning Board before. We discussed this with the Board of Commissioners, so I do want to talk about a couple of changes that have come about when we workshopped this with the board. There was a question regarding how the cost is calculated, and whether or not labor is included. So basically, in the cost of, we're basically developing it's a formula that you'll be able to pay in lieu of, and the city will set the cost of the sidewalk based on what it costs us to build a sidewalk. And so there was a question to make sure that labor was included in that, and so yes, we agree that that's a good idea. There was also a request that there be some sort of a multiplier on that, because we don't want this just to be, we still want the sidewalks to be built. So the request was that there be some sort of a multiplier, so not just, if it costs the city, I'm making up numbers, $500 to construct a foot of sidewalk. We wanted to make that, 1.25 times that cost, because we're trying to provide a little bit of a disincentive. We want people to build the sidewalks rather than just pay and go. So that's been built into the ordinance as well. And then there was some discussion regarding the open-ended nature of it. So I think the intent was that this really should apply to the infill lots, 1 or 2 single-family homes. So I've added the criteria that basically that just cannot apply to more than 3 parcels being basically constructed at one time. So, and that coincides with the way that we treat the requirements for roads. So if you're building, 4 more homes as a, combined project, you have to put in the full-blown road standard. If you're doing 3 or less, you can do a temporary road standard. So I kind of tied it to that. So those changes have been added to the provisions of the ordinance. If you want me to go through in detail, the actual what's been added to the ordinance, I will. But I mean, you've seen it once before, so if you have questions, I'll be happy to work through them and discuss it.
Yeah. Let's open it up for questions, Ms. Burris.
No questions.
Mr. Arnold, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Burr.
I have a question, section 1, let's see, letter C. You changed I'm not sure, you changed the Board of Adjustment from may to shall. Is it necessary for an individual to have to go to the Board of Adjustment to deal with this situation, or can the city staff deal with that since there's a shall now instead of a may? Is
that provision was actually to make this section of the code consistent with the Board of Adjustments section of the code, whereby if you meet the criteria, the board has to give you the variance, as opposed to just, maybe we'll give it to you, maybe we won't. So that was, I believe, recommended by the city attorney that language be added.
Okay, I'm just trying to thinking out loud as an individual. They have to go up in front of the board, wait a certain amount of weeks. If you missed it by a day, you wait another month to see them, then you get approval.
Well, and just kind of give you an idea of how this functions. If you come in as a single-family house and you apply for your building permit, and we say, okay, look, if you meet the litmus test for the waiver that's being built in, then great, you can pay in lieu of. If you don't, then you can then you have to build the sidewalk. Or if you think you still have a legitimate hardship, you can still go to the Board of Adjustments. But what we will allow people to do in order to go to construction, since the sidewalk is the last thing you're going to build,
right.
If they hit a deadline or they missed a deadline, we will simply tell them, look, show it on your building plans and then apply for the Board of Adjustments. It's going to be months before you get to the point of where you need to build a sidewalk. So at that point, they've got it on their plans. If they have to build it, it's already on their plans and they build it, or they do the payment in lieu of. So we do work with people that way.
Okay, that's across the board though, generally the case? Okay. I had questions about how you came up with the number of lots and the multiplier, but you seem the answer of those, so thanks for going through that.
The multiplier was kind of
You just kind of pull that one out?
Basically, yes.
Well, it could have been 1.75.
I didn't want to be too punitive, but I did want to be punitive enough to get someone's attention that maybe they would just opt to build the sidewalk.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Leggett.
So just for clarification on the first part of this 132.01A, where it says, now the development director shall permit the waiver of sidewalk construction where the development order is for repair or remodeling. So this says repair or remodeling, yet you just mentioned
that's
somebody coming in with wanting to build maybe 2 or 3 lots. So I guess my question now is, according to the language here, if it's new construction, the quote-unquote development service director or his designee can't do anything or can't say anything about it.
No,
because according to this, it's talking about repair or remodeling.
There's 2 separate sections. We've always had the provision in there that if you're coming in with a permit that is for a repair or a remodel, which constitutes improvement valued at less than 20%. The only thing that's changing there is going from may to shall. So that's always been in there.
All right.
So so for new construction, the code says 131.00, let me find that section, you're required to build a sidewalk.
Okay,
So then the next section basically starts dealing with the ability to waive that.
Okay.
Does that
All
make
right,
sense?
so even though this part's referring to remodeling,
Right.
new construction is still,
It's still required, correct. Absolutely.
however, would new construction be under that same ability of waiver by the Development Services Director?
Unless it meets you have to go through the, so you have to go to 132.02. Sections A and B really address whether or not the Development Services Director can, or how they make the decision about whether or not you can do a payment in lieu of only. We can't exempt them from building a sidewalk. We can't give them a variance to that. The only thing is if there's a certain, if you're in the middle of nowhere, there's not a sidewalk on either side, and you're building an infill home, that's a situation where we can allow you to pay in lieu of. If they still don't like that, and they think they've got some sort of a hardship, then they need to go to the Board of Adjustment. But the only thing that the Development Services can do is evaluate the situation to determine, is it reasonable to allow them to do the payment in lieu of, and it only can apply for the simultaneous construction of 3 lots or less.
Okay.
So that's our limitation.
And then on this section 2, the 132 you're referring to, in paragraph C, the last sentence, if the sidewalk waiver is granted by the Board of Adjustment, no payment to the sidewalk trust fund or sidewalk construction is necessary. Yet
they have to be able to meet.
Yet we've added in the multiplier as not a disincentive. So I guess my thought process is, in a sense, all right, we're giving you the waiver, that's the relief, but we're still not getting sidewalks out of it. Should they not still be contributing to the sidewalk construction fund?
The only time that they're going to get a waiver to the payment is if there's a couple of criteria where they're going to have to meet one of these criteria under 132.01C. Either the right of way is insufficient.
Right.
So if they meet one of those, then they're going to be able to, they're going to get a walk, essentially. They're not going to have to pay and they're not going to have to build. Mm-hmm. That's the only circumstance.
Well, and I understand that because that's what it basically says here. If they
Right.
get the waiver, I'm just wondering, Tarpon's got a lot of unique properties, so if we keep waiving and waiving and waiving, we don't get sidewalks and we don't build the sidewalk fund. So, I mean, that's, that can be a philosophical thing, but.
Well, let me address that. The Supreme Court, sometime within the last 3 or 4 years, came out with a big decision about the United States Supreme Court about exactions where you have a requirement in a land development code or a zoning code, and in lieu of, they're required to pay something. And again, it's one of those not very bright line tests, but the law of exactions is that the exaction has to be commensurate, with whatever the person is not doing or is giving up or was required to do, which is why the 1.25 is a lot smarter than 2, because you get disproportionate. My thought on the waiver, though, is that if you're going to grant a waiver and set up a condition that is due to a hardship, you may run into problems with the law of exactions when you still exact money from them for something that they theoretically have demonstrated they can't build because of a hardship. So it's a good thought, but I don't know that we want to test it.
Well, but in a sense, we're testing it anyway, aren't we? When the other section.
No, I'm pretty comfortable that this would withstand challenge. I do think there may be an issue if we have where this ordinance, the only time you can get a waiver is where you show that it's impossible to do.
Okay.
And then, we would be exacting money from them for something that's impossible to do. And I don't know we may run into trouble with the Supreme Court case in that situation.
Any other, questions? Entertain a motion.
Motion to approve ordinance 2013-19.
Second.
Okay, he beat you.
That's fine, okay.
Discussion. Roll call.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes. Okay, we're up to staff comments.
I have none, other than it's been fun to be back for a meeting.
Okay. Board comments? Yes? Ms. Press?
Mr. Ackerman, is tonight your last meeting with us?
Yes, this is my last meeting unless you have an emergency one before.
Well, hopefully
August
we
30th.
won't, and I wish you, happy retirement. I see you wore your black cowboy hat.
That's right.
Right off into the sunset.
I'm getting ready.
Silver, and, I hope you will be very, very happy in your retirement, and we will miss having you in Tarpon Springs.
Well, believe it or not, I will genuinely miss representing Tarpon Springs. It's been a unique experience, and I've come over in many ways, but over the time of being city attorney, I've come to really appreciate the uniqueness. And I've said this before, and it's not I'm not BSing you. I've come to appreciate Tarpon Springs as a really unique place. It's like a small town in the midst of Pinellas County. You appreciate your football team. You go back generations, and yet you welcome newcomers. And I'm hoping that where I'm going in North Georgia, maybe the towns up there have that sort of hometown spirit. So it's been rewarding in many ways. So thank you.
We will miss you.
I went to second with Ms. Purse, and we will miss you.
But I'm telling you, you're going to have a great replacement. Jay Daigneault, my partner, is a very bright guy, and he's been able to successfully handle Kansas City for the last 2 years, which means Tarpon Springs should be no sweat.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Okay. Anything else?
I have a question about, we're talking about sidewalks tonight. I grew up around the bayous, and I still live around the bayous. There's really not a continuous sidewalk throughout the bayous. I don't know if it's possible from a board standpoint, if we could recommend maybe the board of commissioners to look at that at some point. It's not pedestrian friendly with crosswalks where sidewalks stop and go, and it just could be a true asset to the city for having a continuous loop around for the non-split walk it and come visit our town. So I don't know if that's something we could do.
There certainly is every 2 years that the money's allocated for sidewalks. One year it's roads and streets, 1 year it's sidewalks. I think that's the way it works. So there's a priority list for sidewalks, and certainly I think I'll try to get Rodney to track on that, and when we think it's about to float up to the Board of Commissioners or for some level of review, I'll see if we can get you guys in the loop for a recommendation on that.
Yeah.
I have a question. We all know about the construction at Whitcomb.
Yes.
That stops at the bridge. Is that correct? Is it going to continue?
I believe it does stop at the bridge. I'm not 100% sure. If you contact Gary Sherman in our engineering division, he can give you the nuts and bolts on. He's kind of the project manager for that right now. I honestly don't want to speak on the public record because I'm not intimately familiar with it, frankly. I have not had a whole lot of involvement in it.
Because I know people have spoken about it for years, and there's one section, and, it's like 2 feet from the water.
Right.
And I worry about all the school buses going by there every day. It's just, so, I mean, I know there's...
Yeah. Call Gary. He'll be able to give you the scoop. Gary Sherman and the,
Yeah, I know.
division.
Okay, anything else? Call for adjournment?
Yes.
Yep. Adjourned.
All right.